All right, I have a question for everyone, maybe just by a show of hands. How many of you have never fingerpicked? How many of you have fingerpicked a lot? So I'm seeing several hands that have fingerpicked a lot. Please help me with your advice and tips and comments as I get through this. What I wanted to do was create a very simple way for the person that hasn't really fingerpicked before to get started. And so this is kind of bare bones. Um, and I'm gonna let you guys be my guinea pig, and I'm gonna have you tell me if this is too much. So we created a handout in CAVARTS, and the first page was all about the mechanics of finger picking, kind of what you need to do to get in a good finger picking position. And the second half of that was really now a couple exercises to finger pick. So I always have to remember these are reverse images. So on that first page, what we're really stressing is uh, there's a lot of different ways to refer to the fingers. Um, because we use numbers a lot when we refer to the frets, or we refer to string names sometimes, we say the fifth string or the sixth string. I kind of just wanted to stay away from an additional set of numbers, which would be our fingers. And I'm just using, when I refer to my fingers, my finger picking fingers, I'm going to be using thumb, index, middle ring. I'm not going to be talking about the pinky at all. Certainly the pinky is there and is used in finger picking. Um, I personally don't use it a lot. I'm not a finger style. I am a finger picker. I grew up without a pick, and I love to play. I love the feel of the fingers. So I do a lot of finger picking, but I just don't use my pinky a whole lot. And one of the things we want to stress, let me get rid of this background here for a second. Assuming that you have the handout, and if not, that's okay too, because we'll still be able to cover you. Talk about, in addition to now we know how to refer to our fingers, is in finger picking, it's good. Now, again, there's not one right way, so I'm not laying out to you the golden rule in total of how you learn how to finger pick. There are many ways to finger pick this. The way we approach this is let's share what seems to be foundational. And as you progress, you may vary off of that, or you may in fact learn a completely different way. And if it's working for you, that's fine. I always work with my students if I'm teaching them something that is kind of fundamental, like we'll talk a little bit about what your picking hand should be resting on, but they may learn a completely different way. And we just pro and con, what are the good ways of the way you've picked and the bad ways, and then what are the good ways and maybe bad ways of the way you didn't pick, just so that we could be thinking about a little bit. But so there isn't one right way, but we want to make a connection with the guitar, and with finger picking, we don't want a lot of big movements. It's not like strumming, and yet even with strumming, the more forceful and big the motion gets, the harder it is to kind of maybe keep time. And then if the song changes where you want individual notes, it's a little harder to do that. So the second thing other than our fingers is making a connection, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. I'm not even going to worry about my fretting hand right now, but it is a physical touch on the guitar. And so there's a couple different ways. Always we'll have this feel up here on high end of our forearm. That doesn't go away. That's still there. But with finger picking, we're actually making an additional connection with the guitar. Now, again, can you float your fingers over and be successful? Absolutely. But generally, foundationally, we're going to ground our finger picking hand one of a few ways. And one way is we're going to use the kind of the fat part between our wrist and our palm, and it's going to lay right here or even on the bridge. You just don't want to palm mute unless you want to palm mute, but I'm keeping them out of the way of the open strings. But it's definitely resting on top of these bridge pins, and it puts me in a position where I can be connected here, and I can assign my fingers to the strings I want. Another way to do that is to take the same part. And again, there's pros and cons to this. This makes me feel, for me, I could be really accurate. So when I'm struggling and I'm finger picking more like this and I'm missing the notes, I find when I get into this position, I feel more grounded. I'm a little more accurate. But I do use several of these different types of finger picking styles. Obviously, one of the cons of this is, and it doesn't need to be a con, but you're not over the sound hole. So you're going to get a different sound from your strings than if you're over the sound hole. So another way is to kind of take that same spot and it will either rest comfortably on the guitar here, or I kind of favor, and I know you're going to ask me, but I kind of favor it touching the E string. So there are times I'm going to have to finger pick this, right? And I don't want it muted. So it might look a little bit like this. So I'll do a G chord because that forces me to finger pick my my low E string. And so when I get to my low E string, I am actually lifting up a little bit. But almost instantly I'm going back and I'm grounding it to the guitar. So I'm still touching the guitar here. Another way to do it I've seen is people will take their pinky, and now we're going to the lower part of the sound hole, and they'll position their finger picking pattern like that. And so the pinky never really comes off, and it keeps, the reason we're wanting this grounding is two reasons. We don't want big movements with our finger picking hand because they need to be, each finger when we see next to golden rule is assigned to a specific string. So we want them to be close and hovering, and the grounding really helps keep them right in place that way. And then the final thing before we get to actually doing a finger pick pattern is the golden rule of finger picking. And I'm going to tell you right now, maybe I shouldn't have used golden rule because we will break this rule. And again, it's okay. If you're getting a desired sound and you're able to keep in time and finger pick the songs you love to play, it doesn't matter which finger and which orders you're doing it. But again, fundamentally, if you learn this pattern, you can grow from it to a whole bunch of different patterns and have a good sense of what you're doing. So the golden rule is the thumb is responsible for the three low bass strings, the E, A, and D. So whatever chord I'm playing, and that's going to be an important thing with finger picking. You might not think about this when you're strumming your songs, but if you're finger picking your songs and you're making your chords, you're going to want to be very aware of what your bass note is in your chord. So if we were playing a G, this would be my bass note. If we were playing an A, my open A string would be my bass note. If I was playing a D, my open D string would be my bass note. So the thumb would always be assigned when I'm changing chords of making sure. So I just went to a C. Now my bass note is on the A string, 3rd fret. And maybe I'll go to an E minor. Now I could pick the note on the D string, but the golden rule is the thumb is responsible for the notes that you're going to want to play from the base of the chord on the E, A, and D strings. And the rest of the golden rule is, again, if we're not worried about our pinky, is the index finger, middle, and ring would be assigned to the G, B, and E strings. So these guys got a little bit of an easier job. They're home as soon as they're sitting over their high E, B, and G strings. So index G, middle B, ring finger, high E string. So if I'm doing, say, a D chord, I'm going to pluck the open D string, and I am going to take my index, middle, and ring and just pluck up. So let's put this to the test. And on the top of page 2 of the handout, we're not even going to worry about a chord. So I'm going to take my hand off. I'm just going to strum some open strings, and I'm going to be following the pattern on the handout. And the way it's written, it's kind of written in tab. If you don't know how to read tab, don't worry about that. What we're looking at is the first 0 is the low E string, and towards the top of the page is the last high E string. So we have from the bottom to the top our open strings, E, A, D, G, B, E. And what the tab is showing is a 0, and then under it is a T, and that means my thumb is going to pick the low E string open. The 0 means open. If there was a number there, that would indicate what fret. So I have two things I'm looking at. The thumb, the T is telling me my thumb, and the low E string has a 0 on that first line. And then you can see the rest of the indication is the fingers, the index, middle ring, middle index, thumb. So let's talk about this in one measure, that very first measure. It's kind of good when you're looking at these to kind of analyze them really quickly. And what I do is when I look at that first measure, I'm seeing a 7-note pattern. I'm just counting 7 individual notes. Each time I see a 0, that's a separate note. And then I'm seeing my finger picking pattern being what I call a roll down, which is a thumb, index, middle, ring. And then we roll back up, middle, index, thumb. So let me just show that real quick. So I'm going to go the low E, and there's my thumb. Now, if you notice, there's no numbers on the A string, and there's no numbers on the D string. So I'm going to strum with my thumb on the low E. I'm going to skip this string. I'm going to skip this string because I'm reading the tab. And then I'm going to go open, open, open. And I'm going to be doing that with my index, middle, ring. So by the time I say ring finger, I'm hitting that high E string. So right now I have T, I, M, R, and that's what I'm calling the roll down towards the floor. And then it comes back MIT, so it means thumb, index, middle, ring, middle, index. That's kind of the roll back up. So it's a 7-note pattern. And if we look at the remaining 3 measures, you would notice the pattern looks very, very similar. And in fact, the only thing that's changing is our thumb position in each of those 4 measures. So if we look at that second measure, we're starting on the A string. But the index, middle, and ring will still do exactly the same thing. So if you don't have the handout, all we're saying is we're going to start on the low E string, and these 3 guys will always do the same thing for all 4 measures. It's only the thumb that's going to change. And so the 7-note pattern in the first measure is thumb, index, middle, ring, middle, index, thumb. Or to say it differently, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 would be the first measure. And that second measure, these guys are doing exactly the same thing. It's my thumb is now going to go to the A string. So if I did the first measure into the second measure, whoops, sorry. So I'm beginning and ending with the bass. And the third measure, I'm just dropping my thumb down to the D string. And again, these guys are doing the same thing. And then that fourth measure just comes back to the A string. So it's a very simple pattern. And if you're brand new to finger picking and that feels like a lot to you, we can even simplify it more to get more of a concentration on what your finger picking hand is doing. And the way we do that is let's just go to the D string for our thumb, and let's do that 3 times. So I'm just using my bass 3 times, and then my index 3 times, my middle 3 times, and my ring 3 times. So if rolling all the way up and down is too much for you, you can start to get a nice feel of the small movements you need and moving from thumb to the next finger if you do a couple repeats on it. And I'm just checking time here. I only have a few more minutes, so I'm going to jump. The next part of it is kind of fun playing over a D chord, so I'm going to show you my fretting hand here. Now I'm just going to do that same pattern. This hand is not going to do anything different once it gets started. It's only going to do D, thumb on the D string, index, middle, ring. So that's all that's going to do. So it's just a 1, 2, 3, 4 note pattern. But you could have a lot of fun with D. So I'll do 2 measures of D, and then I'm going to add my pinky for 2 measures. Then I'm going to take it off. for 2 measures, and I'm going to take my middle finger off for 2 measures. So it's just a nice way where once you get this guy going on autopilot, you don't really have to think much. For this hand to be in a position to comfortably do what I just did, we want to see a space between the thumb and your first finger. And the way we get that, right now my knuckles are very parallel to the strings and my thumb is behind my index finger. This is not a good position because you're trying to pluck basically up, but your fingers aren't approaching it from the right angle. So they call it the claw. If you rotate everything, create some space between your thumb and your first finger, you could really feel your fingers are now in a much better position. They're diagonally towards the floor now and not parallel with the strings. And I feel like it's so much easier, just a very small movement, I can get my strings to ring out, and it makes it a little easier for my thumb. What we don't want is this stacked picture of our knuckles one over the other, because it doesn't put these fingers in a good position to finger pick. So let me come back to you and see if there's any questions. By the way, if you were brave enough to try the very last lesson we had on this is a song. It should sound familiar to you, where you're finger picking the pattern over the A minor, C, D, and F major 7. Put the name of the song in the chat if you got it. So Steve Vaughn gets the free no, Tony got it first. House of the Rising Sun, that's right. Yeah, so I mean, just if you play that, if you can read the tab on that and play that A minor to that C, I think it's an F chord, not an F major 7. That sounds better to my ear, but that's the beginning of House of the Rising Sun. And that's such a simple, beautiful finger picking pattern. And you don't have to get really complicated with your finger picking patterns. You know, it's kind of like strumming. I mean, there's probably hundreds of strumming patterns you could learn, but there's really 4 or 5 that get you through most songs, to be honest with you. Now, someone mentioned landslide. There are certain specific types of picking. One called Travis picking, where you alternate. The thumb's job is to alternate between bass notes after every alternate hit. So it's a very busy thumb, but Dust in the Wind, Landslide, a lot of songs. It's a very common pick pattern. It's kind of fun to play. It's a little harder than just going rolling down or rolling up, but it's a beautiful pick pattern.